Right, I'm back, and if you're wondering where I've been, while you were out of the room we were reviewing the RD32II 1080p H264 action camera. Now the only other 1080p H264 camera that I've reviewed is the Extreme Cam. Now that got a very good review from me. I was very impressed with the quality of the video. Now of course that camera does have an LCD screen on the back, whereas this one doesn't. It's also quite a bit larger than this camera. Although they're both waterproof and they both have pretty much the same specs. Now the Extreme Cam was by no means perfect. It had a couple of big faults. The first one was the sound quality is absolutely terrible, and it doesn't matter if you use the best microphone in the world, it's still awful at encoding the sound. And the second fault that it's got is it's very poor in low light. Everything goes very dark. Now of course if we look at the RD32II, there's already a big issue with this that I experienced while making this video, and that's the video files it uses. It creates H264 video, but it uses the AVI format. Most things use MP4 or MOV. Now my importer in iMovie refused to import these files, just ignored them completely, so I had to convert them all using MPEG Streamclip, which took hours, so that's a big problem. Now I'm going to put some original footage on my own website because YouTube does 1080p, but of course it transcodes it into a lower quality than the camera originally records. So I'm going to put a few small clips on my website so you can maybe download them yourself, try them out and see if they'll edit in your editing package, but they certainly won't in iMovie. Right, so let's kick off this considerable amount of sample footage that I've recorded for you with some scenes from rainy Manchester. I was looking for some sunny days but never found them. You'll notice the camera is shown at the top left of the screen there, RD32II, or it'll show Extreme Cam. If the other one's on the screen, that'll show at the top right. I held both cameras in my hand at the same time and recorded the same scene, so you better compare them like for like. Also on this one, I want you to listen to the sound quality, but I'm also going to zoom up on a section of the image so you can check out the video quality. So just have a look and a listen at this, and then we'll flip over to the Extreme Cam. Well, I think you've probably had about enough of that now. Yeah, the Extreme Cam is terrible, but the RD32II is actually alright. It was pretty echoey there anyway, so that might not be the best test. But you'll notice the video quality is rather similar. And just to demonstrate that now, here is the RD32 inside the Arndale Centre. I always like shooting from this shot because you can see a lot at once, with a nice wide angle lens on there of course. And moving across to the Extreme Cam, you get pretty much the same view. The Extreme Cam's a little bit wider, and it also seems a little bit lighter on this scene, but it varies from scene to scene, but the quality is pretty much the same. Let's just look at some shots, some freeze frames. So there's the RD32II. We'll zoom in on a section of it there, flip across to the Extreme Cam, and as you can see there's nothing really to choose between them. They're pretty much the same. Now let's try something else. I want to spin on the spot here like a nutcase in the middle of a shopping centre. I'm sure people are looking at me. I'm trying to see if it copes any better with adjusting between light and dark. So that was the RD32's attempt. Of course I was holding the Extreme camera at the same time. I didn't spin around twice, I'm not crazy. But both cameras pretty much produce the same results again. So it's still neck and neck. Let's go outside and have a look at that big wheel. Now the detail that you get with both cameras is very good. I hope it comes across on YouTube. I don't know if it does, but as I mentioned before, there are going to be some little clips available on my website so you can actually have a look at the real quality of these clips. But as you can see here, both cameras are pretty much the same. You'll notice there is a colour difference between them, and I just want you to look at this scene here, although I'm going to demonstrate this later on. You'll notice the skies are kind of bluey grey on the RD32II. Move across to Extreme Cam, it's kind of yellowy. I mean, if you saw a sky like that, you'd think it was going to chuck it down. But I think the Extreme Cam makes things a little bit yellow. But then the RD32II also makes things a little bit blue. One of the big features of both cameras is that wide angle lens. Now the Extreme Cam is a little bit wider than the RD32, which creates a bit more of a fisheye effect. You might not like that, you might prefer the RD32's slightly narrower but still wide angle lens. Now in this shot I'm going to go from an outside view to an inside view quickly, and see how the camera adjusts to that lighting change. As you can see here, the RD32II adjusted pretty much immediately. So let's see how the Extreme Cam copes with that same test. So there's outside, flip round, and it's a lot darker, isn't it? And it's taking quite a while to adjust to the difference in darkness as well. This is inside the Printworks in Manchester. It's always rather gloomy in here, but as you can see, the RD32II is filming the scene quite well, although it's adding a bit of grain to it. But as you can see, you can make everything out. Now, on the Extreme camera, what it does is, it doesn't add any grain to it, but everything is really quite a bit darker. And that's the difference between the two cameras. The Extreme Cam doesn't try to gain up the scenes, whereas the RD32II does. So here's the RD32II in Chinatown. I'm just filming this restaurant here, and we'll just have a look how the Extreme Cam does on that. As you can see, everything is quite a bit darker on this, and it's got that rather kind of gloomy, sad-looking raindrop on the lens there as well. But try and ignore that. We'll just do a freeze frame on this section, and then zoom up on the corner. You see the Extreme Cam, you can almost make out the name of that restaurant, the New Emperor Restaurant. But if you look at the RD32II and then zoom up on the same section, you can't make it out at all. And that's because it's trying to gain up the brightness, and as a result that ends up too bright. You can also make it out on the hotel sign here. There's the RD32II's version, and in comparison on the Extreme Cam you can make out the writing a little bit better, but everything else is quite a bit darker. And that's your choice really. Do you want high gain so that it ends up grainy, or do you want no gain at all but quite sharp? So here's the RD32 at Piccadilly Station looking down onto the road as well as part of the station, and then here is the Extreme Cam's version of the same scene. As you can see, you can't really see an awful lot at all, so I think I prefer the way the RD32II copes with things. At least you can see them. Now we've actually found a bit of sun, so let's have a look at this area down at Spinningfields now. There's the John Rylands Library. Look at the colour of it. That's the sun shining down on the sort of red brick there. And then move across to Extreme. Notice it ends up rather kind of pale. Now, I'll be honest, I think the colour was somewhere between the two, but I do prefer the RD32's version. It looks a bit more cheery. Now, if you look at this scene here, everything is very blue, isn't it? And also look at the same scene on the Extreme. It's rather yellow. So neither camera gets it quite right. Let's just look at the difference between the two side by side. So the RD32 errs towards blue and the Extreme errs towards yellow. Now it's quite easy to correct colour problems in most editing packages. Here's my attempt in iMovie to make the blue day into a bit more of a brighter day. But you shouldn't really have to do things like this, it should be right to start with. Now it was a very windy day when I was filming this, and the RD32 coped quite well with the wind noise, although it did crop up on the microphone. The Extreme Cam less well, of course. Now the next shot that you're looking at is one of the nicest shots I think I've ever taken with any camera. I just plonked the camera down on a plant pot and got this lovely scene where everything seemed perfectly in frame, or at least it did to me anyway. Maybe professional photographers would disagree. But here's the Extreme Cam's version of the same scene. As you can see, it's quite a bit wider. You can see the building on the left there, but still, both cameras did a very good job. Quite an interesting looking scene, that one, I think. Be nice as a screensaver or something. Now let's look at some photos from both cameras. Now both cameras are a bit different here. The RD32II uses 2.4 megabytes for a 5 megapixel still, whereas the Extreme camera only uses 1.6 megabytes, which would indicate that the RD32II takes more detailed pictures. So let's have a look at those. And yes, as I'm jumping through these, you'll probably notice that the RD32's photos are better than the ones from the Extreme Cam. Mostly because they've got a better colour palette. You'll notice that here particularly. They're much more accurate to what the scene should be like, rather than a kind of faded yellow that the Extreme Cam gets. It looks a bit like an old Polaroid sometimes. Now, I quite like taking photos with these cameras. The massive fisheye lens that you've got there seems to get everything in shot, and you get some very interesting photos indeed. Unfortunately, it was, as I mentioned, a very windy day, so it's knocked this guy's motorcycle over. That's not something you see often. Hopefully you won't see it too often either. Hopefully it was alright when he picked it up. One interesting thing with these cameras is the way the field of view gets affected when you change the resolutions. Now I'm going to demonstrate that to you now, but I have to do it inside my house so I can attach the camera to the TV so I can change the settings on it. So this is what 1080p looks like on the RD32. And then this is what 720p looks like. As you can see, you can make out quite a bit more left, right, up and down. Same thing happens on the Extreme Cam. So here's the 1080p there, And that's what 720p looks like. You can even see a little bit of the roof on that. Let's look at the difference in data rates between the two cameras. The RD32 at 1080p uses 13.22 megabits a second. It is a variable bitrate, but that's just an example. The Extreme Cam uses 7.38 megabits a second, so that's quite a lot less. Now if you look at 720p 60, the RD32 is at 15.10 megabits a second, and the Extreme Cam's doing that less than half that at 7.41 megabits a second. So let's take both cameras out on the road and see how they compare whilst filming out and about. Now I've got this mount that I made. I demonstrated this in another video. It's basically one of those builder's suction cup things with the mounts attached to it, and that's so I don't have to go riding a bicycle around because I really can't be bothered. So I attached this to the top of the car with both cameras on it, and I got some very strange looks, as you can imagine. I think people thought I was maybe either the police or a Google car, but people actually stopped and pointed, which was a little bit embarrassing, but never mind. My embarrassment is for your pleasure. So let's have a look at the 720p 60 mode. Now of course YouTube knocks everything down to 30 frames a second, so you're not going to get the full effect here, but I wanted to show you this. It also lets you see how wide the field of view is at 720p 60. I'll show you some stuff later on with the same mount at 1080p so you can see the difference between the two. Now we moved into the Extreme camera here. Both cameras are very good actually at 720p 60. There is a drop in quality. Now there's always of course going to be a drop between 1080p and 720p, but it seems artificially reduced. 720p does look better than this sometimes in comparison to 1080. I've got a 720p projector that looks fine at 100 inches across, although this looks a little bit blocky. Now let's just look at this same scene on both cameras. So that's the 720p on the RD32II, and we'll just look at the same thing on the Extreme Cam. And again, as we mentioned before, there's very little to choose between the two cameras, and that's quite surprising given the amount of bit rate that the Extreme Cam throws away compared to the RD32II. So what we'll do now, we'll just zoom in on a section of this so that we can see if there's any difference in quality when you look at fine detail. So we'll just look at those signs on the left there. That's the RD32. Flip across to the Extreme Cam, you'll see it's a little bit softer, and that's probably where the bit rate goes, just losing a bit of the fine detail. Right, so that's the end of the 720p footage. I'm just going to show you 1080p stuff from now on. And the other thing I'm going to do is remove the cap from the back of the camera so that I can expose the microphone hole. And that's so that you can hear how much wind noise gets in there, because that's something that quite a lot of people are interested in. So let's have a listen to that. So it got pretty much the same results as every other camera that I've reviewed. If you attach a camera to the top of your car and drive it around, you're going to get wind noise, and this camera is no exception. The Extreme Cam though is a heck of a lot worse. I've had to really mute the sound quality right down here to 25% volume just so that I can talk over it and still be heard. Now we'll just freeze frame this Mini as it comes past us here and have a look at the difference on the two cameras. That's the Extreme Cam there. Notice you can't read the reg number. And we'll do the same on the RD32, and you can't really read it on that either. Now of course this is at 1080p, so maybe it's different at 720. I didn't actually test that on that. Now one thing that people are concerned about is the gap between clips when it starts recording a new clip after finishing an old one. So just have a look. That was it there. I don't know if you noticed, there was a brief flash of black there between the end of the old clip and the beginning of the new clip. It was a fraction of a second, so the camera's very good at that. It doesn't lose any footage between clips. Now we'll just do a freeze frame here. You might notice a difference in quality between the two cameras. We'll have to zoom up on this car to be able to see it though. This is the registration number on the RD32, if you just look at that there, and then on the Extreme it's quite a bit softer, so that does make a difference. But when you get the footage moving, it's really quite difficult to see any difference between the quality of the two clips from the two cameras. Of course the RD32 is better, and that's because it uses a higher bit rate, and I'd imagine if a lot of detail changes quite rapidly, the RD32 would do a better job of resolving that. Now at night time, it's quite a different story. This is the RD32, and you notice, as I mentioned before, in night footage, it does a lot of gain. That means it tries to brighten the image up so that it can see it. And you can see what we're looking at here in front of the car. Now let's just have a look at the Extreme Cam. You notice it's a heck of a lot darker. I think the frame rate's dropped down quite a bit as well. and it's very hard to make out what's going on, especially here. We'll just flip over to the RD32, and that's the exact same shot on that camera. So of course the RD32 wins, although it does make things grainy. But again, look at the registration number on this car. On the Extreme Cam, you can just about read it, whereas on the RD32 it's illegible. So there's a bit of a trade-off. Now, people quite often want to see me test out the waterproof functions on these cameras, but I'm no Tom Daly. I'm probably more of an Arthur Daly, so that's why I'm driving my car around in the rain. So this is quite a good test as far as I'm concerned. It was absolutely chucking it down. But as you can see, if you drive a car around in the rain, not only do people pull across in front of you like that clown there, but you get a nice psychedelic light show. Okay, it's time to start my rather long summary of the RD32II H264 Sports HD Mini DV 1080p cam. And what do I think of it? Well, it's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, the only camera that I've got to compare it against, like for like, is my Extreme Cam, and it gives that a good run for the money. The only thing it's really missing out on is a few of the features of the Extreme Cam and the LCD screen on the back. But I don't really miss the LCD screen, at least not for framing anything, because both cameras have that big wide-angle lens. Everything in front of you is in shot. There's no need to bother about framing things. It's got the laser on the front if you really want to be accurate, and it is accurate as well, but I never used it. One thing that I would have liked the screen for, though, is the ability to change the different resolutions. On the Extreme Cam, that's easy. On this cam, you've got to attach it to a TV and move through the different menus. If that button on the back there was able to switch between 1080p mode and 720p mode, I'd be a lot happier. Now, one thing where it does excel over the Extreme Cam is in sound quality. The sound quality on this is fine. I mean, it's not brilliant, but it's fine. The Extreme Cam, on the other hand, is absolutely terrible. But of course nothing's perfect. As with everything, this camera's got a few issues, and let me point those out, starting with the minor ones and working my way upwards. The first one is that it's possible to turn the torch on inside your pocket by accident. It only lets you turn the torch on once. You can't do it twice for some reason, but I found out that you can run the power down when you don't really want to. The next one's a little bit more important. The micro SD card slot has a lot of space around the edge, and it's possible you can post that micro SD card inside the camera rather than inside the memory card slot where it's supposed to go. I had to pull mine out with tweezers once. Now, a little bit more important than that, the colour is quite a bit off sometimes. As I mentioned before, it goes towards blue, but then again the Extreme Cam goes towards yellow. Now, you can adjust this, as I mentioned, in post-production, but really it should be a bit more neutral. The other thing that's the big issue and the major one is those files it creates. I couldn't edit the files that came out of this camera, and I had to convert them all using MPEG Streamclip, which took all night. Now, that'll put me off using the camera again. I just want to be able to import the footage straight into iMovie without any hassle. And that's why I'm putting a few short clips up on my website, techmoan.com, so that you can download them yourself, try them out, and see if you can edit them in your editing package. So hopefully I've given you enough information there to be able to make your own mind up as to whether or not this is the camera for you. Now, I'm not going to be able to tell you where to buy one from because mine came straight from the manufacturer. You will find this all over the usual sites that sell cameras like this, and it might not always be called the RD32II, but just look for the H264 video format and the 1080p spec. But don't pay too much. It should be quite a bit cheaper than the Extreme Cam, given the fact it hasn't got an LCD screen on the back and it's got a few less features. But all that remains for me now is to say thanks for watching.